Welcome to the Health Equity and Social Justice Conference, otherwise known as the 7th Annual Health Disparities Conference here at Teachers College, Columbia University. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to our two-day event, and we're going to begin with the Akomfohini, the chief, or rather king shaman of North America, pouring libation in the African tradition, in the language of tree, with a brief translation, but I think she's going to open with a little bit of song. She's got a whole 5 minutes, so let's welcome Nana Karantuma Ayabwafo L.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace. Give yourselves a hand. I am absolutely honored and grateful to be able to share with you today for this exciting annual conference that I've had the privilege to attend from the very first year and every year. So I'm very excited, and I hope that our newcomers can feel that excitement and can join in with us. But I'd like everyone to first just loosen up. Make sure you are comfortable where you are, because it's going to be really a blast of an occasion over these 2 days. As Dr. Wallace said, I'd like to offer the libation, but before I do that, I want all of you to just take a moment to reflect on those people in your lives who supported you on your journey in this career of health, and in reflecting on those people to pull up the energy of gratitude, because with all that is going on in the world today, I learned that when we are grateful for what we have, we get energy. We get more energy to continue our journey to succeed and attract more of what we want. So can I have you all just take a deep breath and let it out. Oh, let's do that again. And one more. Yes, because this is just a stepping stone for where it is that you have decided you want to go in your career. And in the past, there has been some very valuable information to help those in this profession of health and healthcare, and in changing the globe so that there is equality for all. So I would like to pour the libation, but Dr. Wallace wants me to sing this morning.
Just pour the libation.
Okay. I want to just pour the libation, if that's okay. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the pouring libation, I'm going to pour strong drink. This is a ceremony that we find in many places throughout West Africa. When people gather together, there's strong drink poured to acknowledge a creative force, the Mother Earth, and then some ancestors who were supportive in that particular town or village for the success and unity of that community. So I'm going to pour the libation, pouring strong drink, and as Dr. Wallace said, I'll do it in the tree language, and then I'll translate so that all of you can know what I've said in English. Atenancio pe, nana me ye watenancio, atenancio pe, ago, oh, asa sejin sanum, oduma kuma trade ampon, wa daurma, mefrɛ nana gye nsa nom. Nana ɔmpade ɔkɔmfo akɔmahene, mefrɛ nana gye nsa nom. Pampa sudia esu yidi pebere gye nsa nom. Enyere adade kofi gye nsa nom. One to me gye nsa nom. Kweko deko gye nsa nom. Densu yal gye nsa nom. Odente gye nsa nom. Konkom gye nsa nom. Nana ɔkɔmfo enima gye nsa nom. Oh, nana esi fetu nene akonedi abana ono na ni dom ono na ni mpemfo se mefrɛ no. Nana mefrɛ ba kwa na mafrɛ mo nyina. Enye boni ampa se yedu Teachers College, Columbia University. Ntina mesra mo nyina bra beti asem na meka no se wo hema nana ejirewato sumienu. Ono na ofre ni nyina bai o se ene yestati se yebedi Health, Equity and Social Justice Conference, a 7th annual Health Disparities Conference here at Teachers College, Columbia University. Nana, munyina be dinechi, munyina be boaboayen, se boni bianca yen. Asem na ye tie no ebeboa yen. Asem na ye hun a nsu ebeboa yen. Mumma nipa boni fo anasem money bia ha yen. Manasem ekoso. Nana ma ye nem enumunyem ahodin sika ahodie. Nipa boni fo anasem money bia da hono na wonye ye. Wona wodom. Ube prapra efi ye ho na manasem ekoso. Ntina mefrɛ wo se benkom na nefa wona wodom adimu ansi hyira yen adimu ansi boaboa yen se na asɛm bɛkɔso. Ntina mefrɛfrɛ wo se wona wodom adimu ansi na munyina bɛhyira yɛkio mandarma yedamase yedamase yedamase. Translated, I first called on a divine creative spirit to come and watch over us. I called on the Earth Mother who provides sustenance for our life, and that's where our food is being grown, and for the waters, and for all of the angelic host and all of those guardians that walk with us each day. I also called on those former scholars who attended here at Teachers College, and that their spirits will be elated to have so many more scholars here at Teachers College attending this conference. I ask that as we hear information, as we see the slides filled with informations, that our ears and our minds and our hearts can be open to access the full meaning of what is being shared, and that it is part of the parcel and energy that will propel us to success in the future. I ask that all of you have safety and protection, prosperity and peace, and long life. I ask also that all of the presenters will be able to move in and out of this space freely and confidently, so that when they return to their homes and their practices, that they will be full of dynamism. I also ask that there be harmony in your homes, harmony amongst your peers, so that we can all together achieve this equity for all that this conference is representing. I ask that Dr. Wallace be kind and gentle with her students so that in future they can be more dynamic than she is. I ask that you all get paid what your work is worth and that you not be shortchanged. Also, the prayer asks for long life, good health, so that together we can move forward and that this will be a strong community of health providers that will move us not just in 2015, but in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nana. Just click and it will come. So I'm absolutely delighted to have this opportunity to offer the opening address for the conference and to speak to the conference theme. And so, of course, welcome again to the conference. And so this year, our conference theme is Research, Practice, and Policy for Bending the Arc of the Moral Universe Towards Justice in the Era of Health Disparities, the School-to-Prison Pipeline, Mass Incarceration, and the New Jim Crow. More specifically, I'm going to talk about and provide brief training in cultural competence, as well as communication training that will apply to police, who certainly have been in the news a great deal in the past few months, first responders, teachers, students, and all of our varied community members. And we're going to end up all learning a brief form of motivational interviewing, or at least we'll get introduced to it and hopefully excited about practicing it. Most importantly, I'm introducing the concept that the brief motivational interviewing that we are going to learn today represents new paradigm communication for all. And so we'll understand shortly what we mean by that as well. So, we face a challenge, a contemporary challenge, and that involves the extent to which there's so much diversity, not only in this room and the places where we work, well, hopefully there's diversity there, but that as a result of the challenge of encountering diverse and different others, and these diverse and different others may be different from us in any way, a different racial group, a different ethnic group, a different religious group, perhaps they're from our own racial and religious group, but they're a different generation, or they have a different level of acculturation. Perhaps we're talking about those who are of a different sexual orientation, or those who are elders and face things such as ageism. Regardless of the diversity or difference that we encounter, there is a challenge, and that challenge is how do we go about obtaining both multicultural sensitivity and competence in order to avoid perpetuating not only racism, discrimination, and all of those isms, but also disparities in health. And as it turns out, we actually live in a culture of violence, as I will talk about. And so quite often we see incidents of violence that occur. Perhaps the latest one involves a homeless man who was shot on the ground in Los Angeles, once again involving the police. But the idea is, how do individuals or organizations, how is it that we go about experiencing these collective societal experiences of a relapse to violence or recidivism? Also, it's important that in this new paradigm that all of us begin to look at what is positive. For those of you who are from out of town, you may quickly discover that New York may be the capital of cynicism and sarcasm. but just smile and say hi to us anyway. And we'll try to be nice. But in any event, what's needed is really a whole framework that guides us in looking at the positive, and that's a strengths-based approach. Something that's going to allow us to build upon the strengths of each other, not only our clients, those with whom we are working in various settings, but that also we obtain what may be also considered a positive psychological outlook, a whole approach that can replace what we have been socially conditioned to do when we typically encounter the diverse and different other, which is unfortunately all too often we are looking at each other and our differences with stigma and disdain and stereotyping. We need a contemporary multiculturalism, and something that is not only going to be a framework for providers and practitioners to basically learn or adapt to, but all community members, so that we can become free of our biases, the social conditioning that has taught us various stereotypes. One of my favorite jokes involves thinking about how we all grew up at the dining room table. And so typically at the dining room table, we might have had African Americans, families, perhaps it was the father and the mother having a dialogue that the children were exposed to or the grandparents were exposed to, where they're talking with disdain about West Indians or people from the Caribbean. And then when you go to the Caribbean dinner table, they're talking negatively about African Americans. And then when you go to the Puerto Rican dinner table, they're talking negatively about Dominicans. And then when you go to the Cuban dining room table, they're talking negatively about Puerto Ricans and Dominicans and Mexican Americans, and on and on and on. The Irish are talking negatively about the Italians are talking negatively about the Irish, and only the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants are enjoying their dinner, except the woman is silent. Okay? So, in that way, starting from early on in childhood, just merely having a daily dinner, we are systematically socially conditioned into negative stereotypes, and then we unconsciously or unwittingly harbor them toward the diverse and different others. And we can also project negative and low expectations upon others, including our clients. So I'm going to make this multicultural framework and this training in multicultural competence something very simple. Okay, so who are you? A-R-E, and can we learn our ABCs? Okay, so that's pretty simple. Who are you? A-R-E. So we're going to learn that the A stands for acceptance, the R stands for respect, the E stands for empathy. And we're going to learn that these are actually adaptive, affective, coping responses to diversity. So instead of that hate, that disdain, that fear, okay, because that's also what's happening so much with our police. The first reaction when they see a black or brown person may be fear. Okay? And so the idea is, how do we all learn adaptive as opposed to maladaptive responses to diversity and difference? And so we're going to start with respect, even though it's not in the order of A-R-E and who are you. We're starting with respect because respect comes first. When I would work in Harlem with the chemically dependent or in an inpatient detoxification unit in Brooklyn, everyone was Mr. or Miss by their last name. Why? Because it happened to have been a black and brown population mostly. And that's absolutely critical because we're talking about a population suffering from addiction that is used to being systematically disrespected. Okay, not only because of their addiction, but also because they were black or brown. And so what was critical was to establish respect. And suddenly the doors fly open when you are approaching people with such respect. And so respect may be defined, and it is an affective state or emotional state. Who would think that respect is an emotional or affective response? And it follows from acknowledgement of another's experiences as valid, real, and worthy of recognition. Respect tends to be mutual and reciprocal. It should hold sway during our interpersonal interactions. And the idea is that we think of it as reciprocal recognition. I'm truly seeing, or I'm attempting to see and hear who you are. I'm recognizing who you are. You are just not being racially profiled. Okay, you're not just being followed in the convenience store You're not just because you happen to be black or brown. You are just not being pulled over the New Jersey Turnpike because you happen to be black or brown. You are just not being responded to based on a profile or a negative stereotype where there are negative low expectations. You must be about to commit a crime. So let me just pull you over and frisk you and stop you now, because there's an excellent chance, because of my social conditioning in this society, that you are a criminal. Because when I grew up, I saw posters on the subway that showed people jumping over the turnstiles, and they were black or Hispanic. And so I grew up in New York City riding those subways, being socially conditioned by the media, by television, that who are the criminals? Turned out that most of them were from Connecticut using the same tokens for the turnpike in Connecticut in the subway slot. Those were the criminals getting free fares. So the idea is that instead, I see you for who you are, I recognize you. And it becomes a prevailing reality of respect and recognition that can replace that disrespect and non-recognition. In addition, we have to recognize that there is so much damage done from disrespect, lack of validation. And the idea is that those who are perpetrating a lot of this damage are presuming themselves to be superior to those that they are disrespecting. So of course, some of you immediately think of terms like white supremacy. Respect. Respect lays the foundation for acceptance. So we end up, although it's who are you, A-R-E, we start with respect because that's the most basic and fundamental. It precedes, it allows for a higher order experience of acceptance. Okay, so it's also rare, but I'm looking for new paradigm communication. I'm offering a training in cultural competence and in communication that will allow it to not be such a rare experience, but instead, particularly for those of you who are attending this conference and seeking to be a part of this global 21st century civil rights movement for equity in health for all, for social justice for all, then it's up to you to role model this higher order experience of acceptance. And so the idea is that despite long histories of people suffering stigmatization, disdain, discrimination, at the very least, the minimum, they deserve to be respected. But for you, who are being exposed to this information in this conference, we have a higher, I am projecting a high and positive expectation on all of you, which is that you are fully capable of moving to the higher order experience of acceptance. And so we can define acceptance as an affective state, embracing another person, what's going on with them, the nature of their experience, while remaining free of harsh judgment, criticism, or condemnation. And acceptance includes embracing all the strengths that they possess, all of their positive attributes. Now, for those of you who might be a little bit psychoanalytic, I mean, I'm a clinical psychologist who, of course, was exposed to psychoanalytic theory. You know, we talk about good enough mothering and how the essence, all of you who are here able to focus and have egos that can say, oh, it's what time is it, or is it hot, is it cold, am I hungry? It's because you experience someone holding up a mirror to you and reflecting back to you with empathy what it was that you were feeling. Okay, oh, baby seems hungry. Oh, baby seems a little hot. Baby seems cold. Baby crying. Oh, okay, and those facial expressions, empathy, empathic attunement. But the idea is that acceptance is so important, and then empathy defined. Okay, so again, are some of you going to go for this like triple higher order expectation? That you can also indeed empathize, just as you can empathize with that baby that's crying because it's hungry. Can you empathize with the homeless man being shot on the street? Can you empathize? I'll just use the latest one, because we would take up a lot of time listing all 472. But empathy is an affective state where you are successfully using your own capacity to feel in order to sense and sort out, what is this baby feeling? What is this child feeling? Okay? My sister's strength as a principal was that she would stand at the door and greet every child in the morning by name at an academic college prep high school. And she would look at their face and say, oh, you were out yesterday. What's going on with you? Or how are you today? Or stop by my office. Why? Because of that basic capacity to use one's inner sense of what someone may be feeling, to sense, to sort out what may be their inner affective experience. And ultimately, we strive to come up with an accurate sense. I call that metaphorically hitting the nail on the head. Boom. Oh, you seem nervous. You seem anxious. And the person is like, yes. Who are you? So can you become capable of adaptive coping in response to diversity and difference? It's adaptive. Are you capable of acceptance, respect, empathy versus maladaptive coping in response to diversity and difference? And then, of course, there are affects of hope to project positive optimism, high expectations. Do you know how many people have entered a treatment facility or gone for an HIV test and they have projected upon them negative and low expectations? Oh, here comes one of those promiscuous hoes, you know, who's just been out there, and you're like, I can feel it when I walk through the door. You know, when I worked on an inpatient detoxification unit in 1987, as a matter of fact, there's a free journal we're giving out that describes the 30th anniversary of that crack cocaine epidemic and all that has happened since that. But one of the things that, oh, I forgot what I was talking about. Let's just go on. The goal, multiculturalism, going beyond respect, acceptance, and optimism in order to gain multicultural sensitivity and multicultural competence. That's the goal. Going beyond respect, acceptance, and optimism. Oh yeah, at lunch. I hated going to lunch with my colleagues because all they would do would talk about how they're all pimps and prostitutes. Okay? I hated going to lunch with them. That's why I forgot it. So, you know, I would listen to Gary Knoll instead and eat lunch by myself in my office. So that's that. And so they were all destined for the Upper West Side private practice. And my goal was to give it all away for free, which is why I came to my current department. But the idea is that optimism, what about a little optimism? What about a little hope? What about a positive prophecy that, yes, you can learn how to avoid relapse? So the training goal has been acknowledged by many. And so we can deal with a couple of definitions. First, there's multiculturalism on a personal level. Imagine that we live or exist in a condition or state where there are many or multiple cultural influences. For example, the culture of our family, the culture of our ethnic or religious group, the culture of our larger U.S. culture of violence. And then what if we're biracial? What if we have parents who are from different religions or different races? Okay, and what about spending many years in a different country, as clearly Mama Krantma Wafo did, to be able to be fluent in Tree? And there's also multiculturalism for our social condition. When we interact socially with others, the idea is that, you know, this is a social condition that constitutes multiculturalism. And so what is a pluralistic society? It's when we respectfully learn about each other's experiences, practices, values, traditions, and beliefs as we interact socially. We strive to achieve more than just the word I want you to never use, tolerance. This was 1996. Okay, so we don't even use the word tolerance because I have much higher expectations than that. But clearly, it's beyond tolerance. Okay? Ideally, we arrive at that higher level experience of acceptance and respect for those who freely practice traditions that are different from our own. Okay, so have we gotten there yet? Okay, so that's why we're doing cultural competence training and communication training. So we have to recognize that we've all been socially conditioned in those ABCs, maladaptive, affective, behavioral, and cognitive coping responses. If you took a mandatory course that I used to teach, for example, at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, one of the first mandatory ones, and that's going way back to like 1988, taught about nativism, those feelings of superiority, okay, over new immigrant arrivals. So, the reality is that we're just not, everybody here who has arrived on the shores of this country who was not Native American your ancestors went through nativism. Okay, so whether it was the Italians who were looking at the Irish, now we have a wave of Italians. Oh, those Italians. Now we have a wave of Irish. Oh, those Irish. Now we have a wave of Puerto Ricans. Oh, those Puerto Ricans. Now we have a wave of Mexican Americans. Oh, or we had migration from the South. Because of the epidemic of lynching going on in the South, people said, let's get out of here. Let's go north. And so, here come those blacks from the South. Okay? Xenophobia, unreasonable fear of strangers, of all of those new migrant arrivals. This is, diversity training 101. So let's go to 303 and 502. The goal of learning new ABCs. I call it racial cultural skill acquisition in an edited volume by Robert Carter. How we have to learn practical coping skills in response to diversity and difference. This is how, people say, can we all just get along? That's what Rodney King said. Well, if we all learn racial cultural skill acquisition, if we learn how to cope in response to each other's diversity and difference, and not engage in maladaptive behavioral coping like beating people with clubs or shooting them with guns. That's maladaptive behavioral coping in response to diversity or difference. So is following people in the store just because they're black or brown. So is racial profiling. It's maladaptive behavioral coping. Seeing someone and racially profiling them immediately, that's maladaptive cognitive coping in response to diversity or difference. So the goal is adaptive, learning new ABCs, getting away from what's maladaptive, disdain, disrespect. In my 2008 Toward Equity in Health, a new global approach to health disparities, I talk about how these behaviors can actually constitute discrimination. If you deviate from a standard protocol, okay, in other words, everyone who comes to the clinic gets this. Everyone who comes to the hospital gets this. Okay, everyone who has this gets this. Well, suddenly we're deviating from the standard protocol. It's discrimination and disservice delivery, which leads to and contributes to health disparities. So our cognitions and negative and low expectations can become prophecies, and so people don't return, don't follow up, et cetera, et cetera. And so what about our U.S. culture of violence? Well, it's been defined as a way of life. How are we a culture of violence? Because we have a way of life, we have behaviors, we have beliefs, we have practices and traditions that are taught and transmitted from group member to group member, often at that dinner table, from generation to generation, regarding the use of physical force, displays of power, and the spreading of misinformation and myths. And it also occurs in relation to historical trauma. Okay, the destruction of Native American civilization, and now I'm talking about the global destruction of indigenous ancient civilizations that also has followed from us as a rather violent culture. We're not the only ones, but we've exported it. And the existence of the slave trade, violence against all of your ancestors, all of our ancestors, all of the newly arrived immigrants. Of course, the enslaved were involuntary. And the codified degradation of African Americans that we call the era of the Jim Crow, and that Michelle Alexander is going to explain, continues as the new Jim Crow, which was her year 2000 revelation. That we were now in the era of the new Jim Crow, where because of the mass incarceration crisis and the crack cocaine epidemic, which you want to get that free journal outside for the 30th anniversary, because in the back there's a chart that just lays it all out. But as a result of that, we have the mass incarceration, and guess what? It's just like an era of the old Jim Crow. You can't vote, you can't live in public housing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can't get a job. So that's the new Jim Crow. And so in 2003, in an edited volume with Robert Carter, I introduced the psychology of oppression. And so, pretty simple symbols. First of all, it's that projection of negative and low expectation. So you have any two actors, A or B. How are we racially, ethnically different? How are we different in terms of our ages, our socioeconomic classes? How are we different in terms of our sexual orientations? But the idea is that there is this projection of negative and low expectations, and those negative stereotypes we all were socially conditioned to hold, the spreading of misinformation and myths from A to B. Then there's the practice of domination and hierarchical authority by a controlling superior in position A, seeking to subjugate those deemed inferior B. So that includes a lot of black and brown folks when interacting with the police. Suddenly, you are thrust into position B. Okay? As though I am the slave in position B and you are the master in position A. One feeling superior talks down to another as though he or she is inferior. So the arrow kind of got moved. I was concerned about that. I didn't make it a PDF in one-way communication. Talking down. So this is something that, has been talked about. But can you imagine, not only is it a stop and frisk, but I'm talked down to as though I am a child. Not only is it a medical appointment, but I'm being talked down to as though I am a child. Not only is it a classroom where I'm paying $4,000 in tuition, but I'm being talked down to as though I am a child. Okay, so many different scenarios. That's the old paradigm. That's the psychology of oppression. We want the psychology of liberation. We want the new paradigm. So how are we all going to become liberated and free from these oppressive, antiquated dynamics? Well, can we move from the projection of negative and low expectations, as well as stereotypes? Can we move from the spreading of misinformation and myth to reciprocal recognition, that vital respect? I see who you are. It's a new dialectic. I am able to enter the worldview of the other and discover who they are with an attitude of genuine respect and acceptance. Who are you? Can you hold up that mirror? Can you engage in reciprocal recognition? The psychology of liberation, we're going to move from the practice of domination and hierarchical authority by a controlling superior in position A, seeking to subjugate the one deemed inferior in position B. We're going to move to creating a non-hierarchical state of equality. There's a genuine relationship of equality, freedom, justice, and the conditions for all reaching their full human potential, A equals B. And then the psychology of liberation also includes we got to move from being talked down to. Boy, get out the car. Get out the car. Okay, this is a 50-year-old black man. Get out the car. At a traffic stop. People are tired of being talked down to as though they are boys, as though they are slaves, as though they are children. What do you want? I got money, I'm in the store. Why are you following me? What do you want? People are tired of being talked down to as though they are children, as though they are slaves. We have to move toward creating a free-flowing dialogue among equals, a two-way mutual exchange of words in an authentic form of communication. A free-flowing dialogue among equals. And so we're actually offering a psychology or pedagogy of liberation for individuals, the family, the community, societal level. Because we have all internalized. Guess what? This just isn't, a communication training for those who've been in the superior position A. Okay, I'm blonde, I'm blue-eyed, I've got long blonde flowing hair. But on the family level, I was sexually abused. Okay, or I experienced domination because of other family dynamics. Or all of us, any of us, may have been sexually abused or physically abused or frisked or traumatized in any way. So guess what? All of us can do a role reversal. All of us. So how often do we hear, oh, did you hear about that person arrested for domestic violence? Or did you hear about so-and-so physically abusing their child? The first thing that should pop into your head is, as a child, that is what they were exposed to. As the adult, they reversed roles and put someone else in the role of the helpless child or the person who was being abused. So we all have internalized the oppressor, the abuser. And even if we think we've enjoyed the privilege of always being in position A, guess what? We harbor a shadow side, a dark side, and how convenient it is to not integrate the parts of ourselves we don't like. I can just project them onto black and brown people or anyone who's different. How convenient. But all of us have to integrate all the parts of ourselves as a part of this healing. And so for this psychology and pedagogy of liberation, through dialogue, any two actors can foster any two of us simply sitting and having a communication with each other. Okay? Something that I'm not going to call it a difficult dialogue. I'm not going to project the negative and low expectation on all of you that when you try and talk to someone who's different, it's going to be difficult. Why should we be brainwashed and conditioned into thinking that these are difficult dialogues? So the idea is that through dialogue, any two of us can literally foster the evolution of our personal and cultural dialectics. We can uplift our civilization, uplift our communities toward the establishment of a new cultural paradigm. And so in 2003, I was talking about 7 steps for transforming our personal and cultural paradigms. You know, can we listen actively? Can we attune to the other person's affects? That's that empathy we were talking about. Can you hear another to speech? Can you engage in empathic mirroring? So in 1991, my book, Crack Cocaine, The Practical Treatment Approach for the Chemically Dependent, was talking about empathic mirroring. Well, guess what? Miller and Rolnick in 1991 published a book on motivational interviewing. The world is not talking about Wallace's empathic mirroring. The world is talking about Miller and Rolnick's motivational interviewing, but they're the same thing. To be able to reflect the perception of contradictions to create cognitive dissonance. Motivational interviewing, empathic mirroring, 1 million sales globally, 1,000 sales nationally. No. To produce new cognitions. To produce new cognitions. In other words, I say, on the one hand, I hear you saying this, but on the other hand, you're doing this. I'm like, wow, I've got a new cognition. I guess I need to work on something. To produce new behavior, using inner and outer dialogue to refine it. In other words, we have to talk to ourselves because the first thing that may come to our minds is a negative stereotype. What's about to come out of my mouth, I'm going to be spreading this information and this. You know those people. You know what they do. You know those people. We've got to move away from those people because they do that and this and blah, blah, blah. And ultimately, we have to monitor and self-observe. What are we thinking? What am I feeling? What are my maladaptive cognitive responses? It's like learning how to ride a bike. Okay, they told me that I need to do this. I need to balance. Don't lean too far to one side. I need to relax. You're coaching yourself. You're repeating. You're coaching. We need to coach ourselves through. Oh, don't say that. You're thinking that. Oh boy, I've never talked to someone from this country, of this race, of this social class. The first thing that comes to mind is, well, those people are this and that. No, I'm self-monitoring. I'm self-observing. And as a result of my inner dialogue, I can also coach myself to engage in adaptive coping responses to difference, affective cognitions. This is a great opportunity to enter the worldview of someone I don't know and get to know about them. Okay? And guess the result is an expansion in consciousness. You literally create a reality. You can create the reality that I affirm. that I seek to broadcast, that we are a new species living in a new era with new DNA, vibrating on a higher frequency, creating harmony, enjoying abundance from the earth, eating non-GMO whole foods, and preserving the indigenous seeds of the earth. That's what we can be, that we can all hold in mind an image, that we are huddled together in masses, speaking in gentle tones, not having difficult dialogues, speaking in gentle tones, okay, with grass and green and flowers, and the sky is blue with streaks of silver and pink and orange. That if we hold in mind that image, we can create that reality. But we have to learn cultural competence. We have to learn how to communicate with each other. And so we can therefore celebrate liberation. Then we have to sustain it, because there's always relapse. But I've got to self-observe, I've got to self-monitor, I've got to catch myself. Uh-oh, I said those people. Oh, I said they. Oh, excuse me, what I meant to say was, okay, we forgive each other because we're all doing this work together. And when either one of us has a lapse or a relapse to maladaptive coping, well then what do we do as a community? We speak in gentle tones and hold up a mirror and reflect back to someone. So did you mean that, or did you say that? Say, oh, thank you. No, what I meant to say was this, or what is the term? I'm entering your worldview. How should I be describing that? Tell me. Tell me. And then they're going to say, well, I describe it this way. My brother describes it that way. My grandmother describes it that way. And suddenly you realize this culture that this person is a member of is very complex. All of my stereotypes have damaged me. All of that spreading of misinformation and myths and social cognitive conditioning through posters on the subway, through images on TV, they've damaged me. But I can sustain freedom through reciprocal recognition, respect, non-hierarchical equality, and a free-flowing dialogue among equals. So now we simplify. Let's make it real simple. Because that was 2003, this is 2015. Seems like everything I've ever written, after about 5 or 10 or 15 years, I make it real simple. And so now we're just going to say it's all about a new paradigm where A equals B. And if we've been stuck in position E, then we've got to position B. We've got to figure out, how do I get into A equals B? Okay, so I say to the women in my class, the men are speaking out. I'm trying to acknowledge you in order as you raise your hands, but come on, what is it about you if you're stuck in position B that you can't be a little assertive here? Okay? And so we have to, if we've been in position A, we've got to learn sometimes how to shut up and let room for those who've been in position B speak, because there's only an hour and 40 minutes or there's only 2 days. Okay, so the idea is, how do we achieve this A equals B? And eventually, so the next time I write about it, it's just going to be A. Let's eliminate A. We should all just be A, which is aligned. And hopefully we're aligned with the fulfillment of our very highest potential. Or also our ancestors. And so, and maybe also some of those other invisible beings. Because in my culture, when someone dies, it's not unusual to wake up at 6 in the morning and you see them sitting at the foot of your bed in their spirit body. All right? I get out of my car sometimes, I turn off the radio, and the radio comes back on. I'm outside, 2014 Ford Explorer, pressing lock, 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 and the music is so loud. So I say, okay, Tersh, okay, that's my brother. Okay, let's talk. I know you're here. Okay, I'll put out some food for you. So we're not alone. We're not alone. And so to simplify, we're going to use not the term empathic mirroring that didn't sell 1 million books globally. We're going to use Miller and Roenick's term of brief motivational interviewing, although it is Wallace's 1991 empathic mirroring. And so from Miller and Roenick, from 1991 to 2002 to 2013, I'm really going back to some of the simplest explanations they've given of motivation interviewing. And so thanks to some of my fantastic students who are showing up, representing the new paradigm, ready to be A equals B, the most exciting time in my career, because we're no longer talking about 2003. We're shifting to the new paradigm. We're shifting to the new paradigm. We are in the new paradigm. And it's because we are in the new paradigm that it is so dangerous. It is so potentially explosive. When an African American man who was in A equals B, who was in A, aligned with spirit, aligned with ancestors, a loving, beautiful black man, and now he is stopped and frisked and told to get out the car, talked down to. It is a potentially explosive experience, followed in a store and told, what you doing, what you doing? Because they are in the new paradigm. And when the new paradigm meets with a representative of just pure A and is going to thrust you into B, it's not working. People are tired. Okay? Disrespect is no longer acceptable. And so what do we need instead? Who are you? Who are you? You should be someone capable of adaptive, affective, behavioral, and cognitive coping. You should be capable of the affects of acceptance, respect, empathy, and at the very least, if you've got an 11th grade or 12th grade education, and you're like, oh, come on, that's a lot to memorize. Respect. Respect everyone. But those of you getting this training, the highest expectations. Tolerance was 1996. This is almost 2016. You are capable of not only respect, but the higher order acceptance and also empathy. How can you not empathize with a homeless man on the ground? Because we have to empathize with all the police officers who have just been socially conditioned. They just grew up looking at subway posters that showed that the turnstile jumpers were black and brown, when it was really the Connecticut token from the turnpike. So we have to have empathy for those in position A, because they're a part of our community. We need them. We don't need them to stop arresting everyone. We need them to respond. So we have to respond to them with acceptance. This is where you are, but let's bring you along. Not through a difficult dialogue, but in soft, gentle tones. We are all a huddled mass together on this beautiful, beautiful paradise of planet Earth, where there is abundance and enough food and water for everyone if we change now. Because it could be that we almost don't have enough good water. So what is this brief motivation interviewing that, because of my wonderful students and us having these peak intellectual experiences in our fantastic classes, except of course when I make a mistake and I have to learn and come back the next week, or they have to. CDMN. So you know what a CD is, right? And you know that MN stands for Minnesota. So how are you going to remember Minnesota? I think of the artist formerly known as Prince, who said, stop buying those CDs and download them, because I'm not in that contract anymore. I'm out of A over B. And so remember CDMN, and it stands for concern, discrepancy, menu of options, next steps. And so concern, ask about concerns. You know, so does anything concern you about, in other words, what's going on with them? What's their problem? Anything concern, you know? Discrepancy. You know, well, on the one hand, you know, you're standing here outside this store, but you're telling me that you're not buying loose cigarettes. No, I'm not. Okay, well, you can either just move away from the store, okay? Why don't you do that? Or you can stand here and my supervisor's on his way. Now, what would you decide to do? So what's your next step? You know, what are you ready to do now? Or what are you going to be ready to do in about 5 minutes when my supervisor gets here? And then I just walk away. That's it. No chokehold. Very simple. And you can already know what the concern is. Questions. So, This is new paradigm communication for all. The belief that all of us are capable of responding to diversity and difference with adaptive, affective, behavioral, and cognitive coping responses. We're capable of observing ourselves. We're capable of engaging in self-observation. So we have 5 minutes left for questions. Or otherwise, I'm just going to keep repeating myself. So, John Martin is actually going to do a training where, actually, we had a great class with John Martin and Stefan. You know, we were talking about motivational interviewing last fall, and one of the things that happened was that they started talking about how they were practicing it. And they actually developed, 3 people said the same thing, that when they were doing reflective listening, you know how you learn, oh, we're supposed to learn how to listen to each other, reflect back what the other person is saying. We came up with something real simple. For a while there, before we corrected ourselves, I called it black motivation interviewing, because they kept just saying, okay, okay. In other words, you know how you're supposed to remember what the person said and reflect back to them? You know, it's like, well, you could simply just say, okay, so you're trying to decide if you want to go back to school, but you don't know if you can get student loans, and you're not sure where you can get in. Okay, okay. And the person just keeps talking and opening up and opening up. So it's really new paradigm communication for all. What is harder than listening to someone and saying, okay, and they're going to, or you can say, what else? What else? And suddenly you are entering their worldview and getting to know uniquely about them. Uniquely about them. So you're just standing here because you just broke up a fight? Okay. What else? Nothing else. Microphone right there. Oh, so you're not selling loose cigarettes? Oh, no. Now, of course, I've been arrested 28 times for that, but not today. No, I'm not. And do I project negative and low expectations? This is a lying criminal. No, I don't project negative and low expectations. I don't. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Wallace. My name is Mary Martin. I'm a speaker tomorrow, and I'm very inspired and energized by your talk. I just want to say, just walking here, we're in New York City. We're in the most progressive city truly in the universe. And I'm from New York, and I've traveled a lot. And my biggest challenge with all of this, I spend a lot of time in the Middle East, is this, you may have heard the terms low power and high power distance, which really refers to, how authority is viewed in societies and in relationships. And my experience has been very, very, very difficult and very challenging. When you are in a society, when those lines of authority, there is no A equals B. It's all A. So, I've started these conversations on personal levels for the most part. And they are very difficult. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I want to systematically inspire you to change your cognition that they are difficult. It's like riding a bike. Raise your hand if you rode a bike the first time perfectly. Why aren't their hands up? Raise your hand if you rode a bike perfectly the first time. What's the matter with you? Can't you ride that bike? Well, if that was your experience, then it was abuse. So in other words, the first time, it can be difficult.
Yeah,
but the idea is that it's like anything. It can take 3 to 6 months of our practicing. Okay? How many people learn how to ride a bike? Pretty good. So I would say that we have to shift our expectation, because that expectation will create reality. So even if it's, so that how many people decided riding bikes are dangerous and never teach your child how to ride a bike? Who decided that? Okay, so it's the same thing with these dialogues. Okay, the first time you might skin your knee, you might cry, but it might happen the 7th time. But you're going to have the joy of having made a friend here at this conference who is diverse and different from you. Yeah. And you're going to have and it's going to be reinforcing. So we don't have time, but I would say that that's where everything starts. What do we expect? That's why I gave us that image, because it takes a while to manifest a reality. But if we all hold in mind that image, that we're all huddled masses in this paradise of earth, enjoying harmony and abundance, that's how it can come. So you've got to change your cognitions. You've got to have an image of you and I sitting at the after party having a conversation about, so what has it been like for you to work with the Muslim population? Okay, and that's exciting. And I talk about it was like for me to work in Harlem. Okay, and so we're having, and then I talk about my immigrants from Jamaica and roots to East India and the Bush mother, the Bush baby, you know, raped in Jamaica. And suddenly we start talking. And so we have to expect that that's what's going to come, that we are. So we don't have time, and Professor Bash is here, and we're the best on-time conference ever. But I thank you for your question, and I welcome talking to you in the hallway and at the tremendous dinner after celebration, when we'll also have a little Prosecco. Okay, so without further ado, I want you to read your program. You have no idea how many hours I put into this program. It's 82 pages long. And so it is Professor Bash's bio, as well as that of his additional panel speakers. And of course, we're wondering what happened to the table for the panel discussion. So at least maybe we can have 2 volunteers. It's back there. It's back there? Okay. So if you don't know, Professor Bash is nationally renowned for leading our movement for school health. Thank you very much, Professor Bash.
Thank you very much. I want to begin by just thanking Dr. Wallace and Dr. Zemden for inviting me here, giving me an opportunity to speak today. So I'm going to take a couple minutes and provide some background, and then I want to use the rest of our time today for our 2 other speakers, Phoebe Brown and Wenemo Okoye, to have a chance to share with you. So I was recently giving a talk at the National Academy of Sciences, and the topic of the day was how education has really become a key determinant of life course. We've made a lot of progress in this country in education, a lot of improvements in the rates of high school graduation, but too many people have been left behind. The most vulnerable people in our country have been left behind. And those people who've been left behind are the same people that are most affected by health disparities. As adults, you could see this with cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, all of the major diseases affecting the population. Not just in education, you could also see disparities in income, these same disparities in housing, these same disparities in job opportunities. And these disparities of education and health and poverty and employment and housing, they're all interrelated in causal ways. But the way we deal with them is really in silos. Our programs, policies, training programs, funding, they're all in silos. We don't really work together, and we even have silos within our silos. And that's not working very well. So today, we're here for this conference on health disparities, and I was glad to see it's not just health disparities, it's really social justice. Because what we're here talking about today, more than anything else to me, is really about human rights, basic human rights. And that involves education, it involves healthcare, it involves housing, it involves employment, it involves a whole range of things. We're going to talk today about one piece of that, and that's the connections between health and education. So, no matter how well teachers can teach in a school, no matter how well principals are prepared, no matter what assessments and standards are used, how we organize schools, whether they're charter schools or public schools. All of these things are going to be jeopardized if the students are not healthy and ready to learn. And these health issues that we call health barriers to learning exert very powerful but largely overlooked effects on children's ability to succeed in school. Actually, their ability to take advantage of educational opportunities. And it's not a coincidence that the children most affected by these health problems are the same children that are most likely to drop out of high school, to not be reading on grade level in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. And in the same families and communities where there's highest rates of unemployment, where there's the lowest quality housing, where there's problems with gaining access to good quality food. And perhaps these disparities are most greatly exemplified in the rates of incarceration that you'll hear about from our world-class speaker, Michelle Alexander. So we're going to just focus a little bit today on one piece of that in schools. And we may be in the most progressive city in the world, but there's a lot of improvement that needs to happen in schools in New York City, in Detroit, Chicago, Miami, LA, and virtually every city in America. Schools are facing tremendous challenges, and they can't do everything on their own. They can't succeed without help, and they need to prioritize. So we've developed a model to help them prioritize, and we think the things they should prioritize are on health problems that A, are highly prevalent and disproportionately affect kids struggling to succeed. B, problems that we know causally affect ability to succeed in school because they interfere with things like memory, attention, connectedness and engagement, attendance. And C, can be feasibly and effectively addressed by schools. So a list of some of those candidate health problems include things like vision problems, hearing problems, poorly controlled asthma, teen pregnancy, aggression and violence, low physical activity, hunger, inattention and hyperactivity, oral health, and probably most thematically, because it's either a cause or a consequence of all these things, is mental and emotional health. Now this list is not a one-size-fits-all. It's not to say that every school should focus on all the same things. These are just examples. When I originally started doing this work, I talked about the achievement gap and how these problems affect the achievement gap. And I'm sorry I used that term, because really it's about the opportunity gap. If we don't address these problems, among others, children in school don't have an opportunity to succeed. They don't have a chance. They don't have equal access to educational opportunity, which is supposedly guaranteed by law, but not really. So for years I was trying to raise money to do this work, and it's only recently, and I wasn't succeeding, despite a long record at raising money to do other things, on the downstream factors. And I was very fortunate to partner with an organization called the Children's Health Fund, which has been around for about 30 years. It was founded by Erwin Redlener, a pediatrician, and Paul Simon. And they have been providing health care to the most vulnerable children and families in America for the past 30 years. And Erwin came to the realization that while this was good work, it wasn't really making a big enough difference to change the lives of children. And in order to do that, we had to help them succeed in education. And we decided we would join forces and work together to do just that. And together, we've created something called the Healthy and Ready to Learn Initiative. And this is a national initiative. It includes a focus on schools, on parents, on doctors, and on policymakers. And we're really trying to create a revolution in the way these institutions operate. to give kids a chance to succeed in life. Today we're going to just talk a little about the Healthy and Ready to Learn initiative, and I want to try to wrap up quickly because I want you to hear from the people who are really making it happen. But I want to say this Healthy and Ready to Learn initiative in schools has the three elements of it that are distinct are the strategic focus on not all health problems, but on health problems that affect learning. A second aspect is that we only rely on evidence-based programs, programs that we know work, because far too much investment has been on programs that don't work, like abstinence-only sex education program or the DARE substance abuse prevention program. We only rely on programs that we know work. And thirdly, that these programs are effectively coordinated, that we have different people playing different roles, but everybody's on the same team. Healthcare professionals are working with educators, who are working with social workers, who are working with families. We're all working together to try to achieve a common goal. So the research is clear. We know that these problems I'm talking about are prevalent. We know that they causally affect educational outcomes. We know that we can do something about them. So why isn't this happening? This is a social justice, human rights issue. It is the social justice and human rights issue for the future of our nation. The current situation is completely immoral. If you spend any time in the schools, as we do, you will see how the teachers and principals in the schools are working there day in and day out. And without addressing the things I'm talking about, they don't have a chance to succeed. Now, the issue is largely about political will. The science and common sense is all there in education, in public health, child and adolescent development, neurosciences, and even economics. So why aren't we addressing this? Why don't we have a national strategic plan? Isn't that what leaders are supposed to be doing? CHF is addressing this, Children's Health Fund is addressing this, and we're fortunate that we've been able to engage two of the finest people I've ever met in my life, Ph.D. Brown and Wenemo Okoye, who are devoting their lives every day to make sure we succeed at this. So it's a pleasure of mine to introduce Phoebe and invite her to come up and tell you a little about the Healthy and Ready to Learn program in our schools. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Phoebe Brown, and I work with the Children's Health Fund. I'm the director of the Healthy and Ready to Learn initiative there, and Wenemo will be speaking with you soon, but this is Wenemo Okoye right here, who Chuck mentioned. Some of you may know her. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the model that we're implementing in 3 New York City schools here. Chuck mentioned a bigger picture that Children's Health Fund is also focusing on, engaging folks at kind of broader levels in terms of changing policy. And also he mentioned work that we're doing around educating, informing, and trying to change practice among even healthcare providers. But I want to talk specifically about the school projects that are happening here in New York City. We're calling them demonstration projects or pilot projects. So I have a few slides to support me here. But as Chuck said, healthier students are better learners. And the Healthy and Ready to Learn program or initiative that's happening at the Children's Health Fund, the things that we're bringing into to the schools, specifically the intention is to support academic achievement. So while we're addressing health issues, ultimately the goal is to help students achieve academically in school, because we believe that there are health factors that directly affect educational outcomes. So this is just some information about how health issues can affect learning. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I think you can find some reading materials about that if you're interested. But we do know that health issues, disproportionately affect low-income children and children of color. And there are specific communities that kind of bear more of that burden. The health barriers to learning that we're focusing on in the schools include poorly controlled asthma, vision problems, hearing problems, dental pain, behavioral and mental health problems, hunger, fatigue, and also, this isn't up here, but severe social stress. And these are issues that if anyone here has ever spent time in the classroom, either as a student, as a teacher, or otherwise, you know that these come into the classroom with the kids. And teachers have not necessarily been trained or have the resources to address these issues that come into their classrooms every single day. And this program, I think, is really, understanding, as Chuck said, that even if you have the best teachers and the best curriculum and the best resources, if you're not actually recognizing, identifying, and addressing these issues, that it doesn't matter, how many of those other things you have, these are still going to get in the way. So let me talk a little bit more about how we're doing it, and I might come back to the slides a little bit. So we're developing a program where we're bringing 2 staff into these schools. We are in 3 schools in New York City, 2 in the South Bronx, which is the poorest congressional district in the United States, and 1 very close to here in West Harlem. These are all public schools. They are all elementary schools, pre-K through 5th grade. They're all relatively large schools. They all have around 550 up to 750 students. And they have very committed principals. There are some principals who would never let a program like this in the door. They think that, if it's not focused specifically on academics, maybe it's not a priority. But these principals and these teachers are very committed and understand the terms that a lot of the principals use is kind of the whole child. So recognizing that kids are coming into their schools with issues that affect their performance in the classroom, if they're even there that day. So attendance is also a huge issue. So we're bringing in 2 full-time staff, and Wenemo is one of these full-time staff at the school in West Harlem. So one of the staff persons is a school health coordinator, whose job it is to help coordinate activities at the school, work very closely with the school staff, with parents and with kids. And the second full-time person is a mental health clinician, addressing behavioral health issues. And our intention is to really identify in kids health barriers that are getting in the way of their learning, and then actually follow up on them. The New York City schools have been providing screenings in schools for a very long time, but we just don't think screenings do enough. So screenings can catch problems, but that's where it stops. Usually what happens is a note gets sent home, say, for example, with vision screening. A child, doesn't pass a screening for vision, and a letter is sent home to parents say, hey, your kid didn't pass, please make sure that this gets followed up on. And there's no one in the school who is really has time or even necessarily the skills and understanding and resources to follow up to make sure that happens. So when they come back the next year and screen the kid, maybe the kid still has the same vision problem that was unaddressed. And so what we really are focusing on is addressing those issues. So as Chuck mentioned, health barriers to learning that we chose, they specifically, they have a direct impact on attendance, a child being able to come to school, attentions and engagement, whether a child is actually paying attention in class, or if they're too distracted because they're hungry, or if they're there but they can't see so they can't engage. Also directly affects behavior, which is a manifestation of a lot of problems. And then also cognition and community, and even development. So these are the health issues that we're focusing in on. So this is just kind of a little snapshot of the program and the supports and the activities that are coming to the school. So The school health coordinator and the mental health clinician, along with volunteers and other staff, are working very closely with school staff and are bringing in targeted and school-wide screenings, interventions, and follow-up. Kind of putting on the hat of health and public health, which is a big part of my background, working in community-based health care or, even Children's Health Fund, we have mobile units that go out and visit homeless shelters and schools. There's been a lot of focus on access to care, and in the healthcare community we've made as much progress, some progress at least, in trying to reduce some of those barriers that make it hard for families and children to access healthcare services. But and once families get through the door, there are often really great services in community health centers here in the city and around the country. But the problem is that a lot of kids don't make it that far. And so, one of the things that I love about this program and that I think is so important is that we're bringing it to where the kids are. Kids are in school, hopefully. They're required to be in school. It's where they are most of the time, and to bring it directly to them, I think is really reducing that very first barrier, which is just access. So anyway, we're bringing in vision screening, other types of screenings, and not stopping there, also bringing in the follow-up care, so comprehensive exams. And then following those exams, if kids need something beyond that, for example, with vision, we're providing glasses free of charge, and 2 pairs for each kid. So they have one at home, one at school, or one, if one gets lost or broken, they still have one as a backup. And then we're also providing case management, care coordination to help connect families whenever it's not possible to bring services to the school, or in certain circumstances where it doesn't make sense to do a full school screening. For example, asthma. We're not screening every kid in the school for asthma, but we're identifying the kids who have asthma and seeing how well that asthma is controlled, if it's affecting their attendance or other things, and trying to provide really kind of strategic and specific follow-up for those individuals. And then we're also trying to address the classroom and the school environment as a whole. So we're supporting teachers, we're helping to bring in new curricula that help kind of change the school, social and emotional learning. These are skills that children have to learn. They're skills that adults have to learn. And so we're trying to support that in changing the whole, the feeling of the school, making it a safer place, a more positive place for kids to be. We're also focusing on physical activity breaks for kids, not so much about addressing weight or physical activity as a whole, but really as a tool to help kids concentrate and spend more time on task and behavior. Kids are very fidgety, and getting a little bit of a chance to take a break can really help with that. So anyway, we're doing, this is our first year. I don't know if I mentioned that. We just started out in the schools in September, and we're really, getting a sense of how it's going, finding out from the principals and from the teachers and from the Children's Health Fund staff what's working, what could be improved, how to do it more efficiently next year, how to reach more kids, and learning as we go. So I think I'm going to stop with the slides here and see if I'm going to turn it over to Wenemo, who is on the ground in the school, walking distance from here, and spends every day with these wonderful children and their families.
Good afternoon. My name is Wenemo Okoye. I'm actually a student here in the Health Education Department under Chuck's advisement. So it's great to be on this side and sharing with you all what I'm actually doing on the ground every day. So Chuck and Phoebe did a really great job of sharing the background and what we do is important, and I think that everyone understands that and understands the logic behind it. However, I think when we started planning over the summer, we didn't necessarily quite know what we were getting into or what it would look like. And it is working in some very concrete ways. So if I could share just one example of something that's changed over the course of the year. There's a student, I'll call him James to keep his name confidential, who needed an IEP, which is an individualized educational plan. Couldn't get his IEP started and was having a lot of time and struggling in class. And this was his second time in second grade. So what I was able to do was help him get glasses so that the IEP could be conducted and expedited, and the child sat down in the IEP meeting with the school psychiatrist, and he said, "Dr. Micaldo, I can see now." So it's just a very simple, concrete example of what we're able to do for these kids just by putting simple things in place to address these health barriers to learning. And I have tons of stories like that of asthma interventions. We're going to start doing hearing, and I'm sure once we start doing dental, I'll have similar stories to share with you all. But I just wanted to focus a little bit more on a paper that I did last semester with Chuck on cultural competency and school climate. So a lot of what we're doing, although it's not as explicit, is trying to address the climate of the school. So the National Council on School Climate defines a positive school climate as sustainable, positive, and it says that it fosters youth development and learning necessary for productive, contributive, and satisfying democratic society. And I think it's interesting that the theme of this conference is the school to prison pipeline, because what we really want to be preparing students for is a life that we see them having. So I think that productive, contributive, satisfying, democratic society is what we should be working to mirror in the schools. So some of the interventions that we're putting in place are to put supports in place for teachers to be able to provide that environment for the schools. So what I focused my research on was in some observations and just in interacting with the really great staff that I have at the school is noticing some gaps in their training and saw that a common thread was cultural competence. The teachers that were able to provide the most positive environments for their students, the ones that had the least behavioral removals from the classroom, the students who they referred to me more regularly, and the teachers who made the least amount of assumptions were the ones who had the strongest amount of cultural competence and engagement in their classrooms. And that's largely anecdotal. We'd need a much larger N, so I'm not saying that it's really strong founded research, but that's what I'm really seeing is that if we can get teachers to really focus on what their students are bringing to the table and not seeing them quite as these empty vessels and not making assumptions about why they're acting the way that they're acting, then we can actually make some strides forward. So a lot of the research around school climate focuses on 4 components. So safety, relationships, teaching and learning, and environmental and structural constraints. So what I did in my research was try to see how how cultural competence really tied into each of those 4 components of cultural competence, components of school climate. And I saw that teachers who were really fostering a really safe classroom, had strongest relationship with students, had the strongest pedagogy, and the most welcoming environments were the teachers who were making sure that everything they were doing was culturally relevant, including their approach to their student. And the basis of cultural competence is not necessarily thinking about whether your students are Black or Latino, which most of our students are, or poor or rich or whatever, but it's more that you are approaching students by withholding assumptions. So whether that assumption be, oh, that student is sleeping in class because his mom doesn't care and she lets him stay up playing video games all night. A culturally competent teacher would assume, let's see what's going on with that student. Maybe I should send him to the nurse, and then the nurse will this actually happened, talk to the school health coordinator, myself, and then we can look on his file and see, oh, he actually has sleep apnea and extreme asthma. So because that teacher didn't assume this is a parent who doesn't care, I'm just going to brush it under the rug, we're able to now get that child into care and get him help with his health. So all of these things are sort of tied in, and if we can really support a positive school climate and get teachers and staff and parents engaged in seeing that this work is really important and holding our assumptions and addressing these health barriers to learning, creating a culturally competent environment where everyone in the building is assuming the best of our students, then we can really parallel the life that we're trying to build for them. Okay? I guess we'll take... Thank you. I guess we'll just take general questions now.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. There are a couple of us here who work in school-based health centers, and I'm curious about the potential of collaboration with this type of project where you're doing more outreach in the school and also having those health services located on campus, and if you've done research into that potential cooperation.
It's great that you guys are here, that there's representation from school-based health centers. I worked for a while with school-based health centers also, and I think that they're a great model. I think that these two models could be complementary. School-based health centers provide primary care services at a different level than what we're doing for consented students, generally not the entire student body. And I think that's one of the differences is that this model involves getting consent and passive consent whenever possible, meaning a parent can choose to not have their child participate by sending in a form. But we reach every kid in the school with the screenings and then the follow-up whenever possible. I think it could be a complement to a school-based health center model. I'm not sure what level, what grade level you guys are in. The school-based health centers in New York City tend to be more middle school, high school, and the model that we are doing right now is really focused on primary, early intervention, youngest kids, although it could and hopefully will one day, be completely, we be able to implement this in any level. The health issue focus might change slightly as the student body, the age goes up, but I guess, to be really specific about your question, we haven't thought about yet being in schools where there is the resource of a school-based health center. This is kind of an attempt to see how it works in a school that doesn't have any of those resources yet. Some of what this model mirrors is a school-linked model where, WNMO is literally sometimes walking with students and families over to a local community health center that already exists and making that connection to establish what we call a medical home. So there's some similarities, and I think it could be complementary, definitely.
Yeah, we made kind of a deliberate choice not to work in the schools where there was a center, mainly because the majority of schools don't have such centers. So we're working in these schools really to demonstrate the feasibility and acceptability that this work can be done, but our ambition is really to scale it to hundreds of schools, thousands of schools. So that was part of why we chose schools without the centers.
And just one other comment I wanted to make about that too is that the work that we're doing is not done alone. We're working very collaboratively with other with providers. So we're not necessarily the ones doing the vision screening, and we're definitely not the ones doing the eye exams. We're not medical doctors, but we're finding resources locally to provide those services. And our intention is to develop a model that could be implemented anywhere in the country, really. So, relying on other local resources that already exist and engaging them by bringing them to where the kids are in a coordinated way.
And I think that's a really important point. Like, schools can't do it alone. There's really a need for the involvement of families, for the involvement of corporations, for the involvement of religious organizations and solidarity groups, for the involvement of media. This has to be more so on the media agenda. We're finding that there's growing interest, and we have to keep it growing. But those partnerships are really essential, and we can't succeed without them. The other thing I'll just mention about that while we're talking about partnerships is the roles of colleges and colleges of education specifically. We're so fortunate to find WNMO. WNMO is basically inventing a new career path. What she is doing is not an existing career. She is inventing it on a daily basis and doing it in an exemplary way, where the principals and the teachers and the support staff in the schools are just so grateful to see her day in and day out. But what we're really hoping to do is to create more of a professional preparation program so that there will be more Wenemos. We want to clone Wenemo. We want hundreds and thousands of Wenemos because Wenemo, absolutely. Wenemo has already, in a short number of months, touched the lives of children and families in so many provocative ways. And that's exactly what we need. This is really, at the heart of it, it's about humanness and it's about caring. And she really exemplifies that in such an amazing way, so thank you. Joanne.
So I'd like to say thank you for your presentation, and quite honestly, you've answered my question in a very in-depth way. You know, I was really looking at things from a social ecological perspective and curious as to how you went about engaging the optometrists, the people who are educating in terms of asthma, be it nurses. How are you able to get the community involved? I was curious, was it inside the schools? Was it outside the schools, considering the demographic you're working with and the limitations, I'm assuming the limitations of the parents of the children in getting them to the resources where you can create an environment that's conducive for learning. But you've addressed that, so thank you.
Well, I mean, I'll also say it's been incredible. You know, in some cases we've had to search and you know, look hard to find those partners, and in other cases they're coming to us saying, we want to help. Where can we do it and how can we do it? There are a lot of perceived and maybe some real barriers to it happening more often. If a school doesn't have a Wenemo, then they don't have a person whose job it is to address health issues. They just don't. And it might take writing a grant proposal. How many principals have time to do that? Or someone on their staff who has experience doing that.
Right.
And then when you have funding, you have to, you know, produce reports. You have to demonstrate things. There's a lot of work that comes along with it that schools don't have the capacity to do. And so, and Chuck can talk a lot more about some work he's done outside of New York State to, you know, enhance the ability. There's funding out there. The federal government has funding for social and emotional learning curriculum and counselors, but if a school doesn't have the resources and capacity to apply for the funding and implement it and report about it, then that funding is essentially not available to them.
It's interesting. One of the things I should have mentioned is who are some of the major funders of this.
Right.
And two of them are actually international, like the organization that funds the program where Wenemo is working is the H&M Foundation, right? A Swedish company. Wow. Another organization that funds one of our other schools is actually Jaguar Land Rover Foundation. Again, you know, international. So I think in many ways, while the U.S. is thought to be ahead in so many ways, I think there's other countries around the world that are far ahead of us in the nature of this work. And we can learn a lot from them. We spend by far more on healthcare than any country in the world, but we don't have nearly as good health and quality of life as many other countries around the world. And we can learn a great deal from them. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Yes.
My name is Dr. Jacqueline Sawyer, and I am just recently retired from the Department of Education after 25 years of teaching, and watching and observing the lack of services for our children. I taught K through 12, so I kind of saw it all. And prior to those 25 years, I worked with a program out of NYU, was the Creative Arts team, where I was a movement and drama specialist going through all the districts in the city, providing art services. And I was drawn into the Department of Education because I saw this gap in the recognition that our children are valuable in our community. My faith-based lifestyle compelled me to say, I cannot stay on the outside, coming in on a one-shot deal, infusing love and support and arts without committing myself to going in and doing the real groundwork. What I'm curious about is, how did you interface with parents who have to continue sustaining the care of their children? Because what I observed in my high school years and my middle school years more often was that when we identified a child that may have needed a health issue to be addressed, and we gave them the resources for them to go and sometimes brought them to the schools, the sustaining of that process may not have continued. And because I've been in the system so long, I saw where it dropped off again. So how did you get the parents, or how do you get the parents to be involved in the continuance of what you planned? Because after your program may be funded or not, the parents are going to always be there. So how do you let them know it's important for you to continue?
Can I chime in, because I'm with the system, the same exact approach. My name is David Matthews. I'm here representing the poster presentation of Project Change and representing Brooklyn Men Connect, but I'm also a tutor. And I get to leave my daytime job, and I get to go into the homes of the families where these schools, the kids are coming from schools that are doing their damnedest to uphold some of this stuff, but the success of the programs often start to crumble, fall apart in the home, right? And so I'm a tutor providing services in urban communities to help continue what you fabulously are doing, in the schools. So parent education engagement, I think, is a critical part of this process, or the success of this process. So I am also curious as to what you all are doing for this part.
So, oh, you want to answer?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So I think that's so true. There's nothing that we would be able to do in these schools without the engagement of parents. And again, we're in year one, so next year I'll be able to give you a better answer of how we've been able to sustain it. However, I think in the beginning of the year, our work plan made it so that I was plugged into every single parent event that existed. So everywhere parents were, I was. If there was a parent in the office who was registering their child, I was there. I made sure teachers knew to refer parents to me. I made sure that the receptionist knew to refer parents to me, even if it was outside of the scope of my job, just so that they would know my face and what I was doing. And one of the really great things I think we did was by starting with vision screening, because that gave me interface with every single child in the school, because we screened all of them. And all of their parents were aware that that was happening, so then they knew that this new person who is this resource, even if they're, even today, there's a pair of glasses that we didn't provide that came into my office and someone asked me to figure out where they belong to. So I think part of it is just making sure that families know that we're here as a resource to help them sustain, because there are some glasses that are already broken that I have to help them replace. There are some parents who need follow-up case management with their vision. I have to help them with that as well. So I think it's just making sure that you're continuously engaging the people, because it is really important that the parents know that you're there.
I just want to say one other thing. As a product of New York City public schools, from kindergarten, yes, the best public school system in the world, if only we remembered that children are a part of our future. That's what the disconnect seems to be. But I remember them taking us every month to the dental services that were free.
Wow.
Every month we got to go and get free dental care, and they bust us in and out every single month. So that partnership existed back in the 50s and 60s, right? So I don't know what happened to that, but that might be something to look into again, because I am quite sure that my dental health would not have been kept up as well if the education department was not in this project with this, I forgot the name of the hospital that was doing it for us, but every month we went. Every single month. I got good teeth as a result of it.
I want to say a couple more comments about this too, about the parent engagement. So it's very important. I want to say just a couple things. First, I also want to, okay, thank you, say that the coordinators, so this is our very first year, right? We've been in the schools for about just under 6 months right now, and we're committed to being there for, forever, hopefully, funding, dependent, of course. But we brought in the folks who were in the schools on the ground, like Wenemo and her counterparts at the other schools, have really interesting and relevant experience. So Wenemo was a teacher in public and charter schools, right? In neighborhoods different from, not in New York City, but with, all of the same things happening in the environment and in outside of the school walls and within the school walls. So, she's drawing on that experience in the schools. We have two other coordinators, one of whom was a nurse, a school nurse, a nurse in a hospital, also was a teacher for a couple of years and worked in youth development programming. And another coordinator is just an incredible community organizer. She is a grassroots, on the ground. She will put posters up. She catches parents everywhere. She knows how to find the parent that no one else can find, and she's not afraid to do that and to have conversations. And so there's this element of engagement that all three of our staff have that's, I think, inherent. I mean, I don't know. You can't teach those skills necessarily, but there's also an understanding that they have to engage with parents in a way that sometimes school staff don't have the time to do, or maybe not the motivation, or just have different priorities. So that's one thing that I just wanted to say that they bring to the table. But parent engagement is a huge part of this. It is written into kind of our work plan, as Wenemo mentioned, in different ways. We have a bunch of ongoing workshops for parents on topics, some topics that we've chosen, some topics that they've asked for. We have Wenemo and the other school health coordinators are on the phone with parents on a daily basis, following up on issues. She can't do it alone. She can't literally take a child off-site to an appointment. She has to work with the parent to make sure that that happens, and helps the parents have whatever it is they need for it to help facilitate that happening. We are next year going to start working on parent involvement in wellness committees, so that there's a voice there. We're visiting with the parent associations. The parent coordinator is a very close partner to all of the school health coordinators in interfacing with parents, helping to bring in the workshops. We're providing volunteer opportunities. When we can have parents come in and help screen the kids in the school, I mean, that's just an incredible experience. Parents showed up on the day the kids got their glasses so they could be there for that moment. That's huge. So there are all these little ways that we're engaging them with the process, not just outside of the process. And they're invited all the time to be part of it whenever possible.
I mean, you've touched on one of the most challenging aspects of the work. Part of the reason for the need for the program is that parents are struggling. Parents are really struggling. They're struggling with their own issues. Some of the parents might have 2 jobs, 3 jobs. And it's not unrelated to the issue of incarceration that you'll hear more about later in the conference. So, I mean, large proportion of single mother, head of household families here. So parents need our help. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do. We're trying to increase awareness and interest among parents about the importance of things like attendance, and then give them real help, just not ask them what to do, but really give them help in doing what we're trying to do. And realize that it's not just one group, it's not just the school, it's not just the family, it's not just the healthcare system. We really have to work together to give kids a chance at succeeding.
I just want to mention a couple of things. One of the things that came to mind in hearing your presentation is, there's the UN Millennium Development Goals, one of which is primary education. And there's a lot of focus on the countries that are in most need of those development goals. And certainly here we are in New York City, really an incredibly progressive city with, very similar challenges. And I'm sure if we go to less developed countries, we're going to find, the dropout rates are related to, problems of children having to work, like I see in Lebanon and Syria and when I'm in the Middle East. The other thing I just want to mention, that's more of a comment, but I'm a nurse. I don't know if I'm the only nurse in the room, but in response to the comment about, what happened maybe, decades ago to the presence of health promotion in schools, I do realize there's been a huge drop-off of nurses' presence in schools. I know even when my children were in school, there was one nurse divided up between 3 or 4 schools. It was just humanly impossible to begin to address what was really the best they could hope for was maybe some episodic intervention, not at all on a comprehensive level like this. So my question is, what's the role of the school nurse? Is there a school nurse anymore where you are? Because they have disappeared from some districts.
School nurse is my best friend. Yes, we do. We are fortunate enough to have a school nurse. I don't know if it's dependent on the population of the school or there are DOE nurses and DOH nurses. We have a nurse. There are some schools that share them, and all 3 of our schools have school nurses. And all of the health coordinators work very closely with the school nurse. So I'm talking on a daily basis. We're talking with her in my case. So I wouldn't be able to do my job if it wasn't for the nurse and the other support staff, like the guidance counselor, the parent coordinator, even the secretary receptionist. But we're working very, very closely with those people who have been on the ground for longer than we have in that school and know the community better than we have.
Yeah, there's a nurse in every school in New York City for the most part, which is not typical of the United States, but in New York we do have that. But I'm glad Wenemo mentioned the support staff. The support staff really have critical roles to play. And I'm talking about every one of the support staff, from the people who work in the food service, to the custodians, to the security guard who's the first person you see when you enter the building. And is this a school where you feel welcomed and want to be? Because if not, it's someplace you don't want to be. You want to get away from. You don't want to attend. So all of these folks really have to work together in order to make this approach work. And we work closely with all of them.
No, I can hear that in all the presentation, the incredible cohesiveness, which is really very different from, like I said, some nurses are working in impossible situations and just putting out fires of crises.
And that's the reality. I mean, at Wenemo School, what's your enrollment right now?
540.
543, one nurse. At another school in the South Bronx, 740 students, one nurse. So the nurse can't do, the nurse's role is, is specific. It's not the same role as the school health coordinator, but the interaction is necessary, and it's, our intention is to do things that are not redundant. We don't want to replicate. Every one of these schools has other resources in the school as well, and it's our job to make sure that we know what everyone's doing and that we're all filling in what doesn't exist already. We're not competing for students or for participation, and it's all about kind of, as a team, figuring out what needs to be done and really collaboratively working together.
Just think about this. This is the second time you mentioned this is the most progressive city in the country, okay? If this is the most progressive city in the country, how come more than 1 in 5 of the elementary school students in our schools have vision problems that are unmet? How come so many have poorly controlled asthma? How come in one of the schools more than 1 in 5 live in a homeless shelter? How come the rates of chronic absenteeism, which is missing at least a month or more of school, are upwards of 40%? That's the sad thing. This is the most progressive city, and it's not different in Chicago, in LA, in Miami, in Detroit, in Phoenix. You pick the place, as well as in rural Alabama, and Mississippi, and Tennessee. We are not paying attention to children. They don't vote.
I just want to say I hear you and I'm with you. I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East, and I've recently just been in Lebanon with the Syrian influx of refugees in such an extreme situation, and I'm completely aware of what you're saying. But we are having the conversation today. These conversations do not exist
I hear you.
in many places.
I hear you.
They don't exist. They're not a thought. The
Right.
word human rights is not in the vocabulary.
I understand.
So please, I hear
understand.
you, but this is totally where I'm coming from, and I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I just wanted to dovetail on what you were just saying. I think as service providers or within the education system, we assume that parents are supposed to know, right? But realistically, a lot of those parents are coming from marginalized circumstances themselves. And a lot of them have been through the same school systems that now that they're generationally having children experiencing the same problems. So I think realistically what needs to be done is a sense of healing that obviously can be widespread, scaled, that parents themselves will start to be educated themselves. Because I'm almost positive, I'm from Toronto and I'm hearing the same things here as I'm hearing in Toronto. But in most cases, the parents who are coming out and being involved are those parents who are obviously converted or they're, progressive and whatnot. But it's obviously the parents in a lot of cases who are having students experiencing these problems who might have had those same problems themselves. But there has been no technically positive or effective intervention that's been able to stop that and, go forward in a positive manner.
You're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of times parents may not realize, like, oh, my daughter's only in first grade. They can miss a week of school so I can go away.
Mm-hmm.
They don't realize that attendance is one of the most single best predictors of academic success.
Right.
And how important that is. And that's just one example. The importance of sleep and how regular bedtime and a good night's sleep affects your ability to remember things. I mean, that's not controversial. It's well known, but parents may or may not realize it and appreciate it. And even if they do, it may be difficult to implement it when, there's a lot of things going on in the household. So
Right.
it's
so
very challenging.
Right. So I think now it's imperative that we get to the younger folks so that we can start changing that paradigm.
That's what we're doing.
Right?
We're trying to look for
Absolutely.
levers to break
For
the
sure.
cycle.
You have to break
You have
the
to break
cycle
the
now.
cycle now.
For sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Join the movement.
My question was actually asked. I'm also a nurse. I was a school nurse about 2 years ago. And I think when it comes to health, school nurses are limited. We can do but so much, and your work is definitely needed. Thank you so much for your program. I just wanted to find out, I know you're only in 6 months of the program. Do you see yourself going into private schools, into charter schools, into other areas, and how do you bridge the nurse? Because I feel like the nurses are very much so revolving. Many people don't stay in a role because of different reasons, and they're also not used to their full capacity. Right. So having Guanamo there, I think would assist that. And how do you intend to do that?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a couple of things I want to say. One, again, the model that we're developing while it's happening here in New York City, ideally is something that can be done in a school with or without the same resources. So in a school that doesn't have a school nurse, or in a school that does have a school nurse. And your question about kind of expansion or other types of school is a good one. So right now, we're limited by the funding we have. One day we hope that what this project demonstrates may change policies, at least in New York City, so that maybe other schools have some of these resources or all of these resources. We made a decision to be in public schools intentionally because for lots of different reasons, but we felt that public schools were the place to be. I will say that, it's not that children in charter schools or other schools don't have the same needs, because they do, but there might be other resources at some of the schools, or they can use funding in different ways by choice. But the other thing I just wanted to make one comment was that we did very early on, before we even started in the schools, we visited a Catholic school in the South Bronx, and the needs at this school were unbelievable. I mean, I don't even think she had a school nurse, and just as many students from the exact same neighborhoods with the same, and even fewer resources, honestly, than the public school that we were in, a couple blocks away. So the need is out there, and the model again that we're developing could be done. It could even be done in a church or in a community center. It doesn't have to be in a school. It has to be wherever the kids are, but it could absolutely be in a different type of school too.
Part of what we're trying to do is increase the funding. Right now, the Office of School Health, which is a phenomenal office here in New York City, spends about $100 per student. We need more money to meet the needs that are there. Dr. Wallace?
Yes. We're the best on-time conference ever, so we have 50 seconds. I just want to underscore that you heard Professor Bash put out a call for a national strategic plan. You heard Winemo say, join the movement. So it's your responsibility to increase awareness and to make sure that it indeed becomes a movement, and that you are doing something to make sure that we do have national leadership that makes this a national strategic plan. Time's up. So I'm going to do a little housekeeping. I can't resist saying that, my goal in the program here is for Professor Bash to lead us in having a nationally renowned training program, certificate program for school health coordinators. So please look out for that in 1 year. We're going to have a dozen Winemos come to us every September. And we now are going to quickly go to the cafeteria. If you know how to get there, raise your hand so that in groups of 5, 10, you can take people ideally so they don't have to walk in the cold. Because we're having our scientific poster session, 140 free box lunches, 40 vegetarian, 20 salmons on salads. And the cafeteria is open. You are going to vote at 2:10 for the best 3 poster sessions, and let us close down at 2:15 exactly. All right? So you can get to your 2:30 session. We'd like Professor Rajan and any alumni and anyone, Maria Marzan, people like that. We can accommodate about 30 of you in a private lunch in the private dining room. All right? So that's my beloved sister and people like that. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.